betrayal, deception, revenge. What you're about to hear is not fiction. I'm Booze. In Gween and every video on this channel is a confession, a scar, a buried truth. Subscribe if you're brave enough to hear the whole story. The house that forgot my name. Seattle rain has a rhythm of its own. Not a storm, not a drizzle, but a kind of endless whisper that seeps into everything. It's a sound that makes you think or hide. I grew up under that sound in a small blue-gray house on the edge of Mercer Island, where silence wasn't peace. It was absence. My parents never raised their voices much. They didn't have to. Their disapproval lived in looks, in the way my mother's eyes would slide past me at dinner to focus on Jonah, my older brother, who always had stories that mattered more than mine. Or how my father's hand would rest proudly on my sister Claire's shoulder when she brought home perfect grades or applause from her piano recitals. When it came to me, there was nothing to rest a hand on. No moment of pride, no visible brilliance to attach love to. I was simply there. 1. A name that faded. My full name is Harry Ellis, though even that never quite sounded like mine when they said it. To my family, Harry was a placeholder between obligations. To teachers, it was a reminder. Quiet boy, special attention. To classmates, it was a joke. Mouse, they called me because I flinched when they yelled, because I stuttered when I tried to explain myself. I learned early that words could wound more than fists. And because I was quiet, people mistook it for weakness. They didn't know silence can be a kind of armor. Fragile, yes, but patient. When I was 10, my teacher told my parents I might be on the spectrum. I didn't understand what that meant, only that when I said it at home, the air in the living room went colder. My father exhaled through his nose the way men do when they hear something that disappoints them, but can't say it out loud. My mother's lips curved in that polite smile people use when they're embarrassed for you. After that, she stopped correcting Jonah when he mocked me. Stopped asking if I wanted to join the family board games. Stopped seeing me altogether. 2. The island inside. At school, kids sense weakness the way wolves sense blood. They didn't hit me often. Seattle schools are too polite for open violence. But they bruised me with laughter. They found ways to make me invisible while still feeling humiliated, forgetting to invite me to projects, whispering jokes in front of me just loud enough to hear, leaving me off group photos. I didn't fight back. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't understand how. The rules of human exchange seemed to come naturally to everyone else, as if they'd read a manual I'd never been given. So I learned to find patterns elsewhere, in machines and systems that didn't lie. My comfort came from the whirring of an old computer my uncle had left in our garage. It was broken screen flickering green. I fixed it one night with trembling hands and a screwdriver borrowed from my father's toolbox. It booted barely. But when it did, something inside me unlocked. That machine didn't judge. It didn't care if I was slow or different. It rewarded logic, patience, precision. Every click, every command line felt like a language that finally spoke back. 3. The people who don't look back. My father, Richard Ellis, was a man who loved efficiency more than empathy. He ran a modest construction company, Ellis Developments, and liked to remind us that in business, weakness invites debt. I sometimes wondered if he thought of me as a debt. He wasn't cruel. He was indifferent, which is sometimes worse. When he spoke, it was in lessons disguised as love. You have to toughen up, Harry, he'd say, watching me wince when Jonah teased me. The world doesn't owe you comfort. My mother, Linda, was the kind of woman who believed image was survival. Her world revolved around PTA meetings, charity galas, and maintaining the illusion of a perfect family. I think she feared what my differences would say about her more than what they meant for me. Jonah, 3 years older, was the golden child. Tall, confident, naturally good at everything I wasn't. He captained the basketball team, dated cheerleaders, and learned early that charm could substitute for competence. When he joked about me at the dinner table, everyone laughed, even my mother. Claire, 2 years younger, had my mother's beauty and my father's calculation. She didn't tease me, she ignored me. Somehow that hurt more. It's strange how you can live in a house full of people and feel like a ghost. Sometimes I wondered if they would notice if I simply stopped existing. 4. The library of small escapes. By 15, I'd stopped trying to earn their attention. I spent hours at the Seattle Central Library, an enormous glass structure that looked like a brain turned inside out. I loved that building. Inside, no one looked at you long enough to judge you. I discovered programming there buried in a book titled Learning C by Doing. It might as well have been scripture. It taught me that creation could be logical, predictable, that even chaos could be written into order. There were other kids there too. Gamers, loners, the ones who didn't belong anywhere else. I didn't talk much, but they didn't need me to. We bonded over shared screens and debugging marathons. I learned how to build small programs, automate tedious tasks, and later how to break security walls. Not to hurt anyone, but to understand how systems protect themselves. Looking back, I realized that's when my philosophy began to form the idea that protection is the most elegant form of revenge. Not destruction, protection. Because when you know how to protect something valuable, you also know how to take it away. 5. First betrayals. The summer I turned 17, my father offered Jonah a job at his firm. A chance to learn the ropes, he said proudly. Jonah had barely graduated high school. I asked if I could help too, maybe with the office computers or data management. My father looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "This is construction, Harry. You wouldn't understand." He said it kindly. That made it worse. That summer, I worked at a local electronics store instead. My boss there, a Korean-American man named Mr. Park, was the first person who ever told me I was talented. "You see things other people miss," he said one evening after I fixed a security system the company tech couldn't. "That's not weird, Harry. That's rare." I think that sentence saved me. It didn't fix everything, but it planted something. A sense that maybe being different wasn't brokenness, it was direction. When I left for college 2 years later, nobody came to see me off. My mother said she had a charity brunch. Jonah had a game. My father said, "Just make sure you don't waste money." Claire waved vaguely from the hallway. I boarded the bus alone. But as Seattle's skyline faded into mist, I made myself a promise. One day they'll remember my name. Not because I scream it, but because they'll whisper it in regret. 6. The years in between. College was both freedom and exile. I wasn't popular. Old habits die hard. But I found my place among those who valued ideas over appearances. I double majored in computer science and business more out of pragmatism than passion. I didn't want to be a genius who got ignored again. I wanted to understand how power moved. Money, I realized, wasn't evil. It was language, the loudest one. And if I could speak it fluently, people who once dismissed me would have to listen. There were nights I still heard Jonah's laughter in my head, still saw my father's blank stare. But those memories began to lose their edge. I wasn't healing yet. I was transforming. Slowly. I started freelancing, building websites, securing small companies' networks, creating tools for privacy. Every project was a small act of rebellion against the carelessness of the world that had ignored me. By 23, I'd founded a tiny tech startup with 2 classmates, Cipherroot Technologies. We specialized in secure data management, a fancy phrase for helping people keep their secrets safe. It was ironic, maybe poetic, that a boy whose family never kept him safe now built systems that did exactly that. 7. Seattle again. After graduation, I came back to Seattle, older, quieter, but not bitter. The city had changed. The skyline bristled with cranes, coffee shops had multiplied, and my childhood home looked smaller than I remembered. My parents hadn't changed much. My father still ran his company like a fiefdom. My mother still hosted dinner parties where appearances mattered more than truth. Jonah was now working for a friend's real estate firm. Networking, he called it. Claire had married a dentist from Bellevue and posted her curated happiness on Instagram. I visited for Thanksgiving that year. My mother hugged me like she was afraid the neighbors would see if she didn't. "You look healthy," she said, which is what people say when they have nothing else to say. Jonah smirked across the table. "So you're still doing that computer stuff?" "Cybersecurity," I corrected. "Right," he said, smiling like it was a joke. "So you're basically an antivirus guy." They laughed, I smiled too, but inside I cataloged every word. That night, while they slept, I walked out to the backyard. The same old wooden fence, the same maple tree that used to scrape my window. The air smelled of rain and cedar. I looked up at the stars and whispered the same promise I made on that bus years ago. One day you'll see me, not as revenge, not as rage, but as reflection, the mirror they avoided for years. 8. Embers. Sometimes when people ask how revenge starts, they expect a dramatic story. A betrayal, a moment of rage. But mine wasn't like that. It was accumulation. A million small moments of being unseen until the weight of it all became unbearable. The truth is, revenge doesn't always begin with hate. Sometimes it begins with longing, the longing to be acknowledged, to matter. My revenge would not be loud or violent. It would be patient. It would be kind. And that's what made it powerful. Because the sweetest revenge isn't to destroy those who hurt you. It's to become so undeniable that their cruelty dissolves into irrelevance. And in that quiet fire, something inside me began to glow. The noise of silence. Seattle has a particular kind of rain, thin, persistent, almost polite. It doesn't crash down like in other cities. It lingers quietly, soaking into your clothes, your thoughts, and the spaces you thought were dry. When I moved out of my parents' house at 21, that rain became my only companion. I rented a studio on the outskirts of the city. Barely enough room for a bed, a desk, and the flickering glow of my second-hand monitor. The walls were pale and unremarkable, much like I felt inside. But it was mine. For the first time, the silence didn't belong to someone else. It was my silence. At first, that silence was suffocating. I could still hear echoes of my father's disappointed sigh, my brother's laughter when I stumbled over a sentence, my sister's voice dripping with disdain. But over time, the echoes became softer. I began to fill that silence with something new. Code. Programming was the first language that didn't judge me for being different. It didn't care if I stuttered or paused too long before answering. In code, precision mattered more than personality. Logic mattered more than charm. And for someone like me who had spent a lifetime being misunderstood, that was salvation. Days blurred into nights, nights into more nights. I would wake up, write lines of code until my fingers cramped. Eat instant noodles, then do it all again. My neighbors thought I was either a genius or a recluse. Maybe both. I took freelance jobs online, small projects at first, fixing bugs, building websites for startups that would disappear within months. But each task gave me something my family never had: proof that I could create something valuable. One night, around 2 a.m., I received an email from a client in San Francisco. They needed a security patch built overnight. It paid triple my usual rate. I took it without hesitation. That night, fueled by caffeine and defiance, I built something elegant, simple, yet unbreakable. The client wrote back the next morning, "You just saved our launch. We want you on retainer." I stared at the screen for a long time. The words didn't feel real. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as a burden, but as a builder. Over the next few years, work became my therapy. Every contract, every solved problem felt like stitching a wound closed. I didn't socialize. I didn't date. I didn't attend family gatherings. When my mother called once asking why I never visited, I told her gently, "Because you never asked me to stay." The silence that followed said more than words ever could. By the time I turned 27, I had saved enough money to rent an actual office space, a small loft in downtown Seattle with tall windows and a view of the Sound. It smelled of coffee rain and new beginnings. I called my fledgling company Lumos Systems, after the Latin word for light. I wanted to build software that illuminated dark corners of data, of human behavior, maybe even of the soul. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, the boy who lived in shadows, was now trying to build light. Building a company was nothing like writing code. Computers were predictable. People weren't. My first hire was a bright young developer named Sophie Tran, a UW graduate who had the kind of confidence I envied. She talked fast, laughed often, and believed in the impossible. When I told her about my vision for Lumos, creating ethical, transparent technology that protected users instead of exploiting them, she smiled and said, "Then we'll have to build a fortress in a world of thieves." Within a year, Lumo had grown from 2 people to 20. We secured our first big contract with a healthcare firm that needed privacy solutions. I remember signing the deal with trembling hands. When the CEO asked me where I'd learned leadership, I almost laughed. Leadership, I had learned it by surviving a family that never listened. But success doesn't erase the past. It only gives it a new shape. One afternoon, I was giving a presentation to potential investors when I saw him. My brother Ethan. He was older, polished, confident. He worked for a venture capital firm, the kind that fed on young companies like mine. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did, but chose not to. When he spoke after the presentation, his words were sharp, dismissive. "Impressive idea, but lacks scalability. I'd advise caution before further funding." He might as well have said, "You'll never be enough." The room moved on, but I didn't. That old ache returned. The one I thought I'd buried beneath code and progress. Later that night, alone in the office, I replayed the meeting in my mind. The condescension in his tone, the smirk that hadn't changed since childhood. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel angry. But it wasn't the wild, destructive anger I used to know. It was controlled, directed, refined. I whispered to myself, "One day you'll remember my name." Fate, or maybe irony, decided to intervene soon after. A few months later, Lumos was invited to a tech conference in San Francisco. I didn't know it yet, but that trip would change everything. The conference was crowded with investors, journalists, and entrepreneurs. Amid the noise and flashing screens, I found something unexpected, a moment of calm. It came in the form of Clara Beaumont, the daughter of billionaire investor Richard Beaumont, founder of Beaumont Holdings. She wasn't what I expected from a billionaire's daughter. She was quiet, curious, with a disarming sincerity. She attended my talk on human-centric data protection and stayed afterward to ask questions. Not about profits, but about ethics. "You talk about technology like it's alive," she said. "Do you really think machines can understand morality?" I smiled for the first time that day. "Maybe not yet, but I think people can teach them, if they remember what morality feels like." We talked for hours about technology, loneliness, purpose. She had grown up surrounded by power but starved of warmth. In a strange way, we were mirrors of each other. Two souls who had everything except the one thing we needed most: understanding. Our connection grew quietly like roots beneath the surface. Coffee meetings turned into dinners, dinners into late-night walks. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Clara didn't look through me. She looked into me. I told her about Lumos, about my dream to create something meaningful. I didn't tell her about my family. Not yet. Some wounds are better understood in silence. When she introduced me to her father a year later, I expected the worst. Richard Beaumont was known in the industry as a ruthless negotiator. But he surprised me. He saw something in Lumos, maybe in me, that others hadn't. He invested heavily. Overnight, Lumos transformed from a startup to a serious player. My brother called 2 weeks later. His voice was soft, unfamiliar. "Harry, I didn't realize Lumos was your company. Congratulations." It was the first time he had said my name in over a decade. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. Success had given me everything I once thought I wanted: respect, recognition, wealth. But the silence inside me hadn't gone away. It had just changed its shape. That night, Clara asked me what was wrong. I told her I spent so long trying to prove them wrong that I forgot to ask myself what being right even means. She took my hand and whispered, "Then maybe it's time to stop fighting your past and start forgiving it." Her words lingered long after the rain stopped tapping on the window. I used to think silence was my enemy, but now I understand. It's the canvas on which healing begins. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It's about becoming someone they can no longer hurt. Seattle's rain fell softly that night, washing the city clean. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt quietly powerful. Not because they finally saw me, but because I no longer needed them to. Echoes of power. Seattle had never looked smaller. When Lumos moved its headquarters to a glass-walled building downtown, I stood in front of those windows and realized how far I'd come. From the boy who used to watch the rain drip through the cracks of his parents' roof, to the man who now overlooked the skyline, I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt a strange calm. Maybe it was because success once achieved doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like quiet air after a storm. The office hummed with life. My employees called me Mr. Beaumont now. Clara and I had married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony overlooking Lake Washington. Only a handful of guests were invited. My parents weren't among them. I didn't tell them. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed their approval. That was perhaps my first real act of revenge. 1. The marriage of light and shadow. Clara was radiant that day. Simple ivory dress, no diamonds, no designer logos. Just her laughter, and that look in her eyes when she said, "I believe in you, Harry." I remember standing beside her, my voice trembling as I made my vows. Not because I was nervous, but because for once I was happy, genuinely deeply happy. After the ceremony, Richard Beaumont pulled me aside. His voice carried the weight of empire. "Harry," he said, "you're not just marrying my daughter. You're marrying into my world. It's built on trust and power. Keep one close and never lose the other." He wasn't warning me, he was testing me, and I knew that. From that day forward, Lumos became part of Beaumont Holdings' strategic expansion into AI and cybersecurity. Suddenly, my small ethical tech startup became a key player in global discussions about digital trust. The media called me the quiet visionary. I found the nickname ironic. I had spent most of my life being quiet because no one wanted to hear me. Now they paid to listen. 2. The return of the ghosts. Success doesn't silence the past, it amplifies its echo. A month after the wedding, I received an email. Subject line dinner invitation, family. It was from my sister Emily. I hadn't heard from her in 12 years. She'd become a lifestyle influencer, always posting curated smiles, designer handbags, and motivational quotes that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Harry, we heard about your marriage. Congratulations. Mom and Dad would love to celebrate with you. How about dinner this Sunday? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying simply, sure. Clara insisted on joining me. I didn't argue. That Sunday, I walked back into the house that had once been my cage. Nothing had changed. The same chandelier, the same heavy drapes, the same scent of polished wood and cold expectations. My mother greeted me first. Harry, look at you, she exclaimed, voice trembling between surprise and disbelief. My father followed with a slow nod, as if still processing the idea that his least favored son had somehow won at life. Ethan arrived last. He wore a tailored suit and the same smug smile that had haunted my childhood. But this time his eyes flickered. Hesitation, curiosity, perhaps even envy. Clara's presence disarmed them. She had that effect on people. Graceful, poised, and effortlessly kind. She spoke to them with warmth I could never muster. Within minutes, my mother was laughing. And me, I sat quietly watching the scene like an outsider in my own story. During dinner, my father raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, avoiding my eyes. We're proud of you, son. It was the first time he had ever said those words. And yet they felt rehearsed, like lines from a play he'd finally decided to act in. I smiled, lifted my glass, and replied to lessons learned late. Only Clara caught the double meaning. After dinner, Ethan approached me in the driveway. So the rumors were true, he said, lighting a cigarette. Married the Beaumont girl, huh? Must be nice. I shrugged. It's not about who you marry, Ethan. It's about what you build together. He laughed, blowing smoke into the night air. Still talking like a philosopher. You haven't changed much. I met his eyes. No, Ethan. I just stopped talking to people who didn't listen. For once, he didn't have a comeback. That was the moment I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always arrive with fury. Sometimes it arrives in peace. The kind that makes your enemies uncomfortable. 3. The Empire of Glass. Over the next 2 years, Lumos exploded in growth. We expanded into cybersecurity systems for governments, hospitals, and global corporations. Our mission stayed the same: to create technology that protected, not exploited. But success brings predators. Soon I discovered that my brother's firm, Eaton Capital, had been quietly investing in a rival company, Neurodyne, trying to undercut our contracts. When I confronted Ethan about it at a tech gala, he smiled and said, It's just business, Harry. Don't take it personally. But everything about it was personal. He had spent his life reminding me that I was small. Now he wanted to profit from the empire I built. So I did what I always did best. I stayed quiet, and I planned. Lumos launched a secret internal project, Aegis, an AI defense protocol that could detect breaches before they occurred. It was revolutionary. We filed the patent discreetly under a subsidiary while Neurodyne was still pitching vaporware. 3 months later, we revealed Aegis publicly. The world called it the future of cybersecurity. Eaton Capital's investment in Neurodyne plummeted overnight. My brother called me the next day. What the hell did you do? Nothing, I said softly. I just stopped being silent. 4. The kindness that hurts. But revenge, even when gentle, has consequences. One evening, Clara found me in the office staring at the city lights. You've been somewhere else lately, she said. Not here. With me. I hesitated. Do you ever wonder if success is just another kind of prison? She took my hand. Harry, you've spent your life trying to prove you're enough. You are. You always were. Her words hit me harder than any insult ever had, because she was right. I had won every battle, but not for peace, for validation. The next morning, I wrote an email to my brother. It read simply, Let's meet. No business talk, just family. We met at a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Union. For the first time, I saw Ethan not as a rival, but as the boy who used to share my room before he learned to mock me. He seemed tired, older, less sure of himself. He stirred his coffee and said, You always surprise me, Harry. I don't know how you did it. I smiled faintly, by remembering what it felt like to be forgotten. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't require confession. It just requires silence shared between two people who finally understand. 5. Legacy. Years later, Lumos was acquired by an international consortium. I stayed on as chairman, but my days of fighting were over. When people asked me how I had built an empire from nothing, I told them the truth by learning to turn pain into purpose. At my father's retirement dinner, he approached me. Older, frailer, but softer somehow. "I misjudged you, Harry," he said quietly. "You were always the strongest of us." I nodded. Maybe. Or maybe I was just the quietest. He smiled, a real one this time. And in that moment, I realized that healing doesn't always come through confrontation. Sometimes it comes through simply living well enough that you no longer need revenge at all. Seattle's rain fell again that night, whispering against the windows. I stood beside Clara, watching the reflection of the city lights on the water. Everything I had once wanted, to be seen, respected, loved, was already here. Not because they gave it to me, but because I had learned to give it to myself. The boy who was once invisible had built a company that illuminated the world. And as the rain fell softly around us, I thought, maybe the quietest fires burn the longest. Ashes and embers. Success, I learned, doesn't end your battles. It only changes the battlefield. By the time I turned 34, Lumos had become a symbol of everything I had once dreamed of: integrity, intelligence, influence. We were no longer a small company in Seattle. We were global. Our systems protected governments, hospitals, banks. Entire nations relied on our code to stay safe. Yet I often found myself staring out my office window, wondering why the quiet no longer felt peaceful. 1. The cracks in the light. It started with a rumor. An anonymous whistleblower claimed Lumos was hiding user data inside a private cloud. It was a lie, of course. Our entire reputation was built on transparency. But in a world where perception is power, truth becomes fragile. Clara came into my office one afternoon holding her phone. "Harry," she said, voice tight, "it's all over the news." Headlines screamed, "Lumos. Scandal is the world's most ethical tech company, hiding a secret." The irony stung. We had done everything right. Yet one fabricated accusation was enough to make the world doubt. I called a meeting with the board that evening. Sophie, now my CTO, looked furious. "This has Nuruddin written all over it," she said. "They've been waiting for a chance to bury us." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just about competitors. It felt personal. That night, long after the office lights dimmed, I received a call from an unlisted number. A familiar voice said, "Hard to believe, isn't it? That one headline can undo years of work." It was Ethan, calm, cold, almost regretful. "I didn't start it," he said. "But I didn't stop it either. Maybe this is karma, Harry. You built your kingdom. Now you'll see what it's like to have people question it." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then quietly, "I forgave you once, Ethan. Don't make me regret that." He sighed. "You always think you're the noble one, but deep down you love the fight." And then he hung up. The rain outside grew heavier. It sounded like applause for a tragedy no one wanted to watch. 2. The fire returns. In the weeks that followed, Lumos faced relentless scrutiny. Government audits, media interrogations, stockholders panicking. I worked 16-hour days answering questions no one truly wanted answered. They wanted a villain, not the truth. Clara tried to reach me, but I was too consumed. She would stand by the office door some nights, eyes heavy with worry. "Harry, come home," she'd plead. "You're disappearing again." But I couldn't stop. Because I wasn't fighting for money or fame anymore. I was fighting for meaning. And yet deep down I realized something I hadn't before. The boy who wanted to be seen had become a man afraid of being misunderstood. One night Sophie entered my office without knocking. Her eyes were tired but determined. "We found it," she said. She placed a flash drive on my desk. Inside was proof that the leak came from inside Eaton Capital through a shell company tied to Nuruddin. It was Ethan's doing, indirectly maybe, but intentional nonetheless. I felt no anger this time, just sadness. I told Sophie to prepare a report for the authorities. She hesitated. "You're not going to expose him yourself?" I shook my head. Let truth do what revenge can't. For the first time in years, I chose peace over power. 3. The weight of forgiveness. The scandal eventually dissolved. Lumos was cleared of wrongdoing. Our transparency earned us even greater trust than before. But victory felt hollow. Ethan's firm collapsed within months. When I read the news, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. A week later, I received another message from Ethan's assistant. "He's been in an accident. Car crash. Stable but critical." For a long time, I stared at the screen. The child in me whispered, "He deserves it." The man I had become whispered, "No one does." I went to see him at the hospital. The air smelled of antiseptic and regret. Ethan lay motionless, his face pale beneath the fluorescent light. Machines kept time for him, beeping like a slow heartbeat. I sat beside him and whispered, I never wanted to win like this. For the first time I saw him not as my rival, but as another broken boy raised in the same cold house. When he opened his eyes briefly, he looked at me with a faint smile. "You were always the better man," he murmured. I took his hand. "No," I said softly. "Just the luckier one." 4. The distance between love and fear. After the accident, something inside me shifted. I began to step back from Lumos, letting Sophie handle operations while I focused on what mattered most, life outside the code. But Clara and I, we had grown distant. My obsession with work had carved silence between us. One evening, I found her sitting by the window, tears on her cheeks. "I feel like I've lost you to something I can't compete with," she said. I sat beside her quietly. "You haven't lost me. I just forgot how to be found." She looked at me, searching for the boy she once met, the one who talked about morality and light. "I fell in love with a man who wanted to heal the world," she whispered. "Don't let him become a ghost." That night I lay awake realizing that forgiveness wasn't a one-time act. It was a daily practice. Not for others, for ourselves. I had spent my life forgiving people who hurt me, but I had never forgiven the boy who stayed silent when he should have spoken, or the man who chased success when he already had love. So I wrote a letter to myself. It began, "Dear Harry, you did enough. You are enough. It's time to stop surviving and start living." I never mailed it. I didn't need to. 5. The gentle burn. Years passed quietly. Ethan recovered slowly, though he left the business world behind. He opened a small bookshop in Portland. Sometimes he'd call, sometimes I'd visit. We didn't talk about the past anymore. We talked about books, about the rain, about nothing in particular. Clara and I renewed our vows on our 10th anniversary. No luxury, no headlines. Just a quiet ceremony in the same garden where we first met. She wore the same smile, and I finally understood what it meant when she said healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. Lumos continued to thrive. I became less of a CEO and more of a mentor. I began funding scholarships for students who, like me, didn't fit in. The silent ones, the overlooked, the underestimated. One afternoon, I received a letter from a young coder who had received our scholarship, Mr. Beaumont. "I used to think being invisible was my curse, but now I realize it's how I learned to see the world. Thank you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. It felt like closing a circle. Seattle's rain hasn't changed. It still falls softly, like a reminder that everything, pain, love, forgiveness, eventually returns to the earth. Sometimes when I walk along the waterfront, I catch my reflection in the glass towers and barely recognize the man looking back. He isn't angry anymore. He isn't trying to prove anything. He's simply at peace. The world remembers me as the founder of Lumos, the man who changed data ethics. But I know the truth. I'm just Harry, the boy who once believed silence was weakness until he learned it was strength. Because sometimes, the quietest fires don't burn to destroy. They burn to warm the coldest parts of us. The light remains. Seattle had changed. The skyline was sharper, the traffic heavier, and even the rain seemed busier somehow, falling not in sheets, but in hurried drops that vanished before they touched the ground. But I hadn't changed as much as I thought I would. At 47, I was still the man who walked slowly, thought too much, and preferred silence over small talk. Except now the silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. 1. The return to ordinary. After years of chasing shadows and headlines, I had learned to love the ordinary. Waking up early, making coffee, walking through the misty streets near Green Lake. Things that once felt trivial now felt sacred. Lumos ran without me now. Sophie became CEO 2 years ago. I stayed on as chairman, but my days of midnight calls and moral battles were long gone. Instead, I spent most of my time teaching at the University of Washington, a course called Ethics in the Age of Data. Students often stared at me like I was a myth. They'd whisper, "That's Harry Beaumont, the man who took on the corporate giants." But I always began class the same way. "I'm not here to teach you how to win. I'm here to teach you how not to lose yourselves when you do." And somehow that always caught their attention. 2. Letters from the past. One morning as I prepared for a lecture, I found an envelope slipped under my office door. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Ethan. "Harry, it's strange to think how far we've come. I used to resent you for your patience, your silence, your refusal to fight me the way I wanted you to. I thought strength meant power. But watching you forgive me even when I didn't deserve it showed me that real power is restraint. I've been teaching part-time at a community college. My students remind me of us, two brothers trying to find meaning in a world that rewards cruelty. Thank you for letting me fall, and thank you for being there when I did. You were right, Harry. Revenge doesn't heal, but understanding does. Ethan. I sat for a long time with the letter in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to look backward or forward, just grateful. That night, I showed the letter to Clara. She smiled faintly. Do you remember what you said when you started Lumos? I shook my head. You said, I want to build something that can't be bought. Not a company, but a conscience. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You did it, Harry. Maybe not the way you expected, but you did. 3. The circle closes. A few months later, Lumos organized its 15th anniversary gala. It wasn't my idea. I had avoided celebrations most of my life, but Sophie insisted. People need to see where we came from, she said. The event was held at the Seattle Art Museum. Minimalist, elegant, quiet. Just the way I liked it. When I walked in, the hall went silent for a moment. Then applause erupted. But all I could think about was how surreal it felt. The boy who once hid from bullies now being cheered by the city's elite. During my speech, I didn't talk about business metrics or growth charts. Instead, I told them a story. When I was 8, I used to sit alone behind the school library. Not because I liked being alone, but because I was invisible. People thought silence meant weakness. But silence, I've learned, is where truth gathers its strength. Every insult, every dismissal, every betrayal, they weren't curses, they were lessons. I used to think I was building a company. Now I know I was building a mirror, for all of us to see who we really are when no one's watching. The room was quiet. Even the servers paused, and then slow, steady applause filled the air. I looked around the room, at Sophie, at Clara, at my former rivals now standing respectfully, and realized something simple but profound. This wasn't revenge. This was redemption. 4. The last conversation. A year later, Ethan called. His voice was weaker now. He had been diagnosed with a heart condition and was undergoing treatment in Portland. I'm fine, he said before I could even ask. I just wanted to tell you something before time gets too impatient with me. I smiled. You're still poetic for a businessman. He chuckled softly. Then he said, You were the one who got it right, Harry. You didn't burn bridges. You built lighthouses. And somehow even the ones who hurt you found their way back through your light. I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened. Promise me something, he said. When people ask how you did it, how you turned all that pain into peace, don't tell them it was easy, tell them it was worth it. That was the last time I heard his voice. Ethan passed away 3 months later. At his funeral, I gave a short eulogy. No grand speeches, just one line. He taught me that even broken compasses can still find home. When I walked out into the rain, I felt both heavy and light, as if life itself had just exhaled. 5. The legacy of quiet fires. Years passed. I retired completely at 55. Claire and I moved to Whidbey Island just outside Seattle, a quiet place of pine forests and sea air. Sometimes students from my old class would visit. They'd ask about Lumos, about success, about forgiveness. And I'd tell them, forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's choosing to drop the hook you've been dragging. Then we'd sit on the porch, listening to waves crashing softly in the distance. One evening, I received a call from Sophie. She wanted to name a new foundation after me, the Harry Beaumont Institute for Ethical Technology. I laughed. That's a mouthful, Sophie. Just call it Lumos Light Fund. She smiled through the phone. Still humble. No, I said. Just realistic. The light isn't mine. It's borrowed from everyone who believed in me when I didn't. A few weeks later, as I watched the sunset fade into the sound, Clara brought me an old photo album. Inside was a picture of my family, my parents, my siblings, me. We looked stiff, distant. But for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. They did what they knew, I said quietly. They hurt, and they passed that hurt on. But I had the choice to end it. Clara nodded, and you did. We sat in silence watching the last light slip behind the horizon. The sea glowed faintly, like embers that refused to die. 6. What remains? I don't believe in happy endings. I believe in honest ones. The world didn't suddenly become kinder. People still lie, betray, and fight for power. But every once in a while, someone chooses empathy instead of ego, and that's enough to keep the world from collapsing. If I've learned anything, it's this. You can't control how others treat you. You can only decide what you become in response. And sometimes becoming gentle is the loudest form of revenge. When I walk along this beach now, I often see the reflection of the setting sun on the water. It reminds me of a line Clara once wrote in her journal. Even when the fire dies, the warmth lingers. That's what I hope to leave behind, not a fortune, not a company, not a name, but warmth. For those who were unseen, unheard, underestimated. For the quiet ones. For the ones who still believe kindness can outlast cruelty. Because maybe in the end, the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving that you can stay kind in a world that tried to break you. Seattle. Autumn, present day. The rain falls softly again. And somewhere between each drop I hear the boy I once was, whispering finally at peace. You made it, Harry. You didn't burn the world. You lit it. I'm Booze. Nguyen, and these are real stories, told by those who lived them. Subscribe, if you're ready for the next truth. If this story made you think twice, hit that subscribe button. The next one might just break you. Thanks for staying till the end. Every week I uncover another story the world tried to forget.